Legendary Lighthouses, supported in part by a grant from Lighthouse Depot, your source for lighthouse collectibles, artwork, and decor, so that you may keep the legend alive. Lighthouse Depot store and catalog of Wells, Maine. And by the annual financial support of PBS viewers like you.
We invite people to just go back in time as far as their imaginations can take them.
The beauty and romance of lighthouses masks the dangers of the deadly shores they guard.
These shores early on were uncharted, so the ships were getting destroyed on these sandbars in the storms. And that was really the reason for the lighthouses.
This is where lighthouses began in America. The first lighthouses showed the way to safe harbor for ships carrying goods and immigrants to the New World.
It doesn't go out, it doesn't move, it's always in the same place and you can always depend on it.
The first lighthouses on these shores helped build a nation. They fostered the growing maritime economy of the colonies, safeguarding the lifeline between the Old World and new harbors from Boston to the Chesapeake Bay. Beavertail Light Station, Rhode Island, was the country's third lighthouse. Built too near the water, it collapsed. Its original tower lay buried and lost until it was exposed by a hurricane in 1938. The present square granite tower was built in 1856. It was strategically placed to mark the entrance to the important harbors of Narragansett Bay. It allowed Rhode Island to successfully compete with Massachusetts for trade with England and the West Indies. Narragansett Bay remains an active shipping area. Several historic lights continue to guide vessels around the bay. Nearby Newport, Rhode Island is one of the most popular sailing areas of the North Atlantic.
This is the Goat Island light. Locally it's called the Green Light. This light marks the north end of Newport Harbor. People use it to steer into Narragansett Bay, so it's quite a necessary light. And just past it, of course, you can see Rose Island Light, which is the object of all sorts of affection.
Charlotte Johnson is the director of the Rose Island Lighthouse Foundation.
Someone told me very early on when I started working on the Rose Island Lighthouse that nobody didn't like a lighthouse or a caboose. And we found that to be true.
Rose Island Lighthouse was saved by a group of local citizens. Just a short boat ride from fashionable Newport takes guests back to a vastly different time and allows them to experience what it was like to be a lighthouse keeper over a century ago.
We invite people to just go back in time as far as their imaginations can take them. Upstairs you can become the keeper of the week, and downstairs you become the keeper for a night. We let everybody take care of not only themselves, but the lighthouse while they're here. It's mostly adventure and, romance and all this wonderful kind of stuff that's going on. It's a wonderful place to visit. The first time keepers come out here for the week on a Sunday afternoon, I think they're pretty overwhelmed with what the responsibilities are. But within a couple of days, it gets kind of ironed out. The lighthouse is only on 1.5 acres of land. In Rhode Island, our state constitution guarantees everyone the privileges of the shore. So you can walk around this entire island at the low tide line. You just make sure that the seaweed line is above you and the water's below you, and you are on public property. People are welcome to come in their own boats from 10 until 4, and they can get into the lighthouse. And there's the lighthouse.
I know,
You ready for it?
I'm so excited. I can't
So we'll get you situated in the lighthouse, and then I'll give you some idea of
As a new couple arrives to begin their week as light keepers at Rose Island, another couple is ending their time as keepers. Ricardo Berenati and Catherine Saburin discovered Rose Island Lighthouse on an earlier visit to Newport. They knew immediately that they wanted to become keepers of the light.
Coming to Rose Island, you are isolated. You become part of what this was 100 years ago. Now it's like an oasis from life, but to those people back then, it must have been a hard life. Hard life. Some people call us an innkeeper. We are not innkeepers. When we take the assignment to stay at the lighthouse, we become lighthouse keepers. We have duties that have to be performed every day, starting at 8 o'clock. Okay. Temperature at observation, 63. Minimum temperature, 58. We'll reset it. I'll lock that. Next, the rain.
It was stressful at the beginning for us, just coming from the real world. And with all of our chores that we were assigned or told that we could be allowed to do, we got into it, and it was really, we got to enjoy them. We really, really loved it.
It was just wonderful not having any connection or communication with the outside world. It's just a wonderful experience.
Probably one of the neatest things is to see how satisfied people are with themselves when they leave.
Charlotte Johnson is more than just the caretaker of Rose Island Lighthouse. She knows everything about the lighthouse and how it works, and more importantly, what it represents.
It's just this wonderful thing that says, here is a structure that represents people caring for other people. And as we become part of maintaining this structure, you become part of caring. And it's really a wonderful thing to be identified with in that way.
Just across the bay from Rose Island is the Lime Rock Lighthouse, home to a remarkable woman who became one of the most famous lighthouse keepers in America. The Ida Lewis Yacht Club is named for the lighthouse keeper's teenage daughter, who rescued several people from the chilly waters of Narragansett Bay. Ida grew up working as her father's assistant. A few years after his death in 1872, she was officially appointed keeper. Her own demise in 1911 ended more than half a century of service at Lime Rock. Lighthouse author Eleanor DeWire.
Ida did things that women usually didn't do in her day. She pulled up her skirts and got into a boat and rowed and rescued. I think rescuing was her hallmark. That was really what made her different from a lot of other women of her day. People just fell in love with the idea that here was a young girl who was doing all these self-sacrificing things and making a good name for the ladies. After 1869, when she appeared on the cover of Harper's, I think she was more surprised than anyone that she should be famous. And I think she was kind of a media heroine. She probably wondered, why me? And she shunned all of that. I think she wanted to stay out here and just keep the light. Lime Rock Light wasn't a very significant light. It's a harbor light. The light is very small, very inconspicuous. It's in a little window upstairs out the bedroom, and Ida or her father, whomever kept it, would have just leaned out and kindled the oil lamp and back in. It was very simple. But I think because we had this one woman who was very unique in the way that she rescued and she was viewed by the public, it's gained a place in immortality.
The New London Harbor Light was another of the early colonial lighthouses. Nearly a century and a half after it was built, a second lighthouse was needed to warn ships away from the dangerous shoals at the entrance to the harbor. The new beacon casts its beam from perhaps the most unusual lighthouse in the country, a three-story French-style structure built on submerged rock. No one knows exactly why designers chose this style for the New London Ledge Lighthouse, so out of character with its surrounding. Still, the dramatic setting and eccentric design have generated an abundance of lighthouse folklore.
I've never been to a lighthouse where there hasn't been a ghost story. I mean, they're eerie places. There's strange sounds and echoes. Ernie is very famous because he's been reported over and over again, and he's gained a personality. I've looked at the records and have found absolutely nothing that supports that there was ever a keeper there who was killed, yet everyone I've ever talked to who lived there says, yeah, something is there. It moves tools around. I was told that one night Ernie picked up a pillow and tried to smother one of the keepers. When you're there, the wind moves around through the windows. It would certainly freak me out if I stayed the night. It's just a very eerie place.
This is Coast Guard Light Station Boston with the weather.
Light Station Boston, Group Boston, good afternoon, send your traffic.
Group lights cloudy, visibility 10, winds east-southeast at 16.
Boston Light Station is the oldest lighthouse location in America. It is also the last lighthouse in the country fully manned by the Coast Guard.
Light Group, good copy on the weather, stand by, anyone out?
Light station out.
The first Boston lighthouse was built on Little Brewster Island in 1716 by the colony of Massachusetts to aid shipping at Boston Harbor. During the Revolutionary War, American troops twice attempted to destroy Boston Light to keep it from being used by the British. In 1776, as the British fleet left Boston, one of their last acts was to blow up the tower. It was rebuilt in 1783 with walls 7 feet thick at the base and 75 feet high. Later, another 14 feet were added to the tower. Petty Officer Scott Stanton commands a 3-man Coast Guard team stationed at Boston Lighthouse. He's the last official lighthouse keeper in America.
It's definitely a unique position. There was 66 light keepers before me, and I don't think I'm going to get the full impact of it all until I leave here and look back on it and say, wow, you know, that was a pretty neat job. I think it was a much harder job back then. You know, they had to row their boats everywhere they wanted to go. They couldn't just run ashore for food or water. Even the things that we do today on a daily basis, such as replenishing our water supply or our fuel for the boat, takes 2 or 3 times as long as it does if you were on the mainland all the time. There's always something that needs to be fixed. It's always something that needs to be painted or cleaned. Well, the lens gets a weekly cleaning with a lint-free cloth. If there's hand marks or smudges or something on it, we'll take a little Windex to it.
The Fresnel lens at Boston Lighthouse is more than 140 years old. Fresnel technology revolutionized American lighthouses in the mid-1800s. French physicist Augustin Fresnel designed 7 different sizes or orders of lenses. The largest were for tall seacoast lighthouses. The smallest were for harbor and bay lighthouses. The Fresnel lens is a curtain of prisms centered around a bullseye. The design bent the light into a concentrated beam that could be seen over a great distance. Maintaining the second-order lens at Boston Lighthouse is something Scott Stanton and his crew take as seriously as the many keepers who came before them.
Lighthouses aren't as key to navigation as they once were with all the electronics that we have. But there still are some boats out there without it, and if the light helps one mariner a year from going up on the rocks, I think then it's worth it.
Six miles south of Little Brewster Island, an awesome spectacle seems to ride atop the ocean waves. Just below the surface lurks a deadly obstacle to navigation in the North Atlantic, Minot's Ledge. It was long thought to be impossible to build a lighthouse at this dangerous yet crucial spot. The need for a lighthouse outweighed the risks. The first lighthouse was built on steel legs embedded in the rocky ledge. Almost from the first, keepers noticed an uneasy swaying motion when storms hit the tower. A committee examined the structure and declared that Minot's Ledge Lighthouse could withstand any storm. They were wrong. Lighthouse author and historian Ross Holland.
Then a really serious storm came along, and that just took them and twisted those legs off the rocks that they were glued to, and 2 men were killed. The keeper of the lighthouse, however, had gone ashore just before the storm, and he was listening one night, and there was a violent ringing of the fog bell, with the result that the lighthouse, that people felt that something had happened to it, and indeed it had. It wasn't there the next day. They found the bodies a couple of days later.
The collapse of the Minot's Ledge Lighthouse is considered one of America's worst lighthouse tragedies. The second lighthouse built at Minot's Ledge is among the most daring design and construction feats in U.S. lighthouse history. A stone lighthouse was constructed on land at nearby Cohasset, Massachusetts. It was then dismantled and moved row by row onto the ledge during low tide. Construction took 5 years. For nearly a century, keepers lived within its massive walls with little fear of being swept away.
That is a strong structure, but its most important feature, I think, outside of the strength, is that it was round, and that water would just break against it and go around it and not smash into it and act as a hammer beating on the lighthouse tower. It's survived, it's in great shape, it's automated now, and it's no complaints about it.
When Henry David Thoreau walked these beaches in the mid-1800s, he called Cape Cod the bared and bended arm of Massachusetts. Reaching 70 miles into the Atlantic, Cape Cod is a formidable obstacle to navigation. The sweeping ocean and shifting sands which make the Cape so dangerous for ships have also carved a spectacular ocean retreat of protected beaches and majestic dunes.
Every day the sea is carving up the shoreline, and you can go down to the beach in Truro or Provincetown or Wellfleet, and you can see a different beach every day.
Greg O'Brien has spent much of his life on Cape Cod. He has written books and produced films about the Cape.
To me, the quintessential Cape Cod experience is to walk the outer beach from Wellfleet down to Provincetown. Because you can go along the outer beach in stretches where you won't see a soul. There probably isn't a town that epitomizes Cape Cod more than Truro. 2/3 of Truro is within the Cape Cod National Seashore, which is beautiful because it will never be disturbed. I can take you on roads and back roads in Truro that haven't changed in hundreds of years and look the same as when Thoreau walked Cape Cod. These are old stagecoach paths, and they're back roads, and a lot of people don't know about them. These are roads which you'll find the old cottages off, you'll find old cranberry bogs, you'll find bluffs, and you'll find no people. Cape Cod is so spectacular. It's just a sense that it's bigger than all of us, it's more beautiful than all of us, and we're all attracted to it. And that's what also symbolizes a light, because a lighthouse is part of the symbol of Cape Cod, and the lighthouse was always an attraction for people, a beacon of security. And I think that a lot of people who come down to the Cape are looking for that warm, friendly beacon.
Cape Cod is just the sort of place where you would expect to find lighthouses. Over a period of about 100 years, 18 lighthouses were built on Cape Cod. Only a few still cast their life-saving beams out to sea. Yet taken together with the remains of several others, they comprise one of the most accessible collections of coastal lighthouses in the world.
There are numerous shipwrecks around the outer Cape. In fact, since the beginning of recorded history, I believe there have been about 3,000 shipwrecks. These shores early on were uncharted, so the ships were getting destroyed on these sandbars in the storms. And that was really the reason for the lighthouses. It was to preserve the cargo and the men on these ships. And they decided to create a lighthouse in the late 1700s on Cape Cod, and it would be the first lighthouse that ships would see as they came over from Europe.
That first lighthouse on Cape Cod was located in Truro, perilously close to the sea. Built in 1797, the Highland Lighthouse was rebuilt in the mid-1800s when the land beneath it crumbled into the sea. Known today as Cape Cod Lighthouse, this second structure faced a similar fate because of continued erosion. It was decided the only way to save the light was to move it. Greg O'Brien produced a film about moving the lighthouse.
What precipitated the need to move was the ocean itself, and not only did the ocean cause ships to wreck offshore, which really caused the lighthouses to be built, but the ocean also has eaten away steadily at Cape Cod. Well, it was an incredible move to watch. It was a combination of high-tech and common horse sense. They had to jack this light up, this huge structure, and then they had to move it literally inch by inch, and it would move basically 5 feet at a time, but so slowly it was like watching paint dry. And unless you were right next to the light, you couldn't even see it move. It's safe for a number of generations. If my family stays here on the Cape, generations from now, maybe my relatives will be involved in the next move.
The ocean side of Cape Cod has always been a dangerous place for those who make their precarious living from the sea. About halfway out from the mainland, the flashing beacon of Chatham Lighthouse casts its beam over an area that has seen many tragic wrecks and heroic rescues. Before lenses rotated or flashed, mariners needed to be able to tell one lighthouse from another. To differentiate it from nearby Highland Lighthouse, Chatham was given 2 towers. The North Tower was later moved to Easton, where it became the Nauset Beach Lighthouse. The remains of its base can still be seen at Chatham. The current lighthouse has survived on this site for over 100 years. 2 previous lighthouses were taken by the shifting sands and encroaching seas. The Three Sisters of Nauset was another attempt to differentiate early Cape Cod lighthouses. 3 identical lighthouses were built in 1838 at a point between the one light at Truro and the 2 lights at Chatham. They ultimately proved inefficient, and they were sold for various uses, including summer cottages. The 3 wooden towers were reunited by the National Park Service in 1975. They stand today in a wooded area near Nauset Beach, in the same relationship to each other as they did more than 100 years ago.
This is the one that was forgotten. This is the one that everybody walked away from, and there wasn't anybody doing anything with it. It just sat here for 20 years.
How close to the ground do you want to get with this?
About a foot from the bottom.
All right.
I don't want the water splashing so that it gets the foundation all mud.
Jim Walker spent more than 30 years in the Coast Guard working on lighthouses. Now he heads a group of volunteers restoring the Race Point Lighthouse along one of Cape Cod's most dangerous and desolate stretches. Hundreds of ships have ended their days on Race Point.
The Race itself is a very strange place. That literally miles and miles of nothing but sand dunes and beach grass. It's 2 miles in any direction to the nearest accessible road. We get here on a four-wheel drive vehicle, but there are a few stray people, energetic people that have walked down, and every once in a while somebody will stop in. I believe the Coast Guard had intended to tear it down if somebody didn't come along and do something with it and do it fairly quickly. Boards were on the windows and the place was full of mildew and it was abandoned. Somebody had stolen all the electrical panels and wires that were cut in the cellar, and the light fixtures were all missing, and it was just a nightmare to try to put it all back together again. If we added up all the tanks of gas and all the phone calls and all of the odds and ends and the things that we have brought down here, the price would be prohibitive. But weekly or a little bit at a time, it doesn't seem to hurt too bad. It has taken a long time, and we've still got a long way to go. There's many other things that need to be done. The rewards are few, but they're very, very valuable. Just to spend the night here, like I did Monday night, and watch that spectacular sunset, one night is worth an awful lot of work.
The nearby islands of Martha's Vineyard and Nantucket have much in common with Cape Cod. Known today as summer playgrounds of the rich and famous, they share a similar history of struggle and survival in the hostile environment of the North Atlantic. Of the 5 lighthouses on Martha's Vineyard, the oldest and best known is Gay Head Light, named for the bright colors streaking the nearby cliffs. The present structure dates from 1856, when the lighthouse was fitted with a first-order Fresnel lens. Only the tower and automated light remain at the original site. Gay Head's Fresnel lens was moved across the island to the museum at the Martha's Vineyard Historical Society.
It's probably our most popular thing in the museum, and it's certainly the best known if you're trying to give directions to somebody how to get here. Say, just look for the light.
Bruce Andrews is director of the Martha's Vineyard Historical Society.
The Fresnel lens was an engineering marvel at the time, and this one was at the Gay Head Light from 1856 to 1952, so it sure served its purpose. The mechanics of how the lens turns is basically the same as a cuckoo clock or a grandfather clock. It's a weight-driven system. Gay Head was one of the last areas on Martha's Vineyard to get electricity. And after that area got electricity, they decided that the Fresnel lens wasn't necessary anymore. Another one could be used more efficiently. The first thought was, when they removed it, was to just smash it up and bury it so they wouldn't have to worry about it. But the winning plan was to move it to the site of the Historical Society and keep it so that it could be shared with the public.
Martha's Vineyard's maritime heritage and the wealth it generated are visible throughout Edgartown, center of the island's social and commercial life. Affluent sea captains built and lived in many of its magnificent homes. One of the most prominent buildings at Edgartown is the Old Whaling Church, with its 92-foot-high clock tower. It was built as a Methodist church in the 1840s. It gets its name from the fact that whaling money was used to pay for its construction. Edgartown Lighthouse sits on the western edge of the Edgartown Inner Harbor, opposite Chappaquiddick Island. The original light, established in 1828, was a tower on top of the keeper's house. It was replaced in 1939 by the current tower, which was floated on a barge from the mainland. Nearby Nantucket Island has a rich maritime history. In the 1700s, it was one of the largest whaling ports in the world. In modern times, Nantucket has transformed itself into a premier vacation resort. Nantucket's Brant Point Lighthouse is the second oldest lighthouse location in the United States. As many as 10 different lighthouses have stood on Brant Point over the past 2.5 centuries. The present structure, built in 1901, is one of the shortest lighthouses in operation today. Folklore suggests that tossing 2 pennies overboard as you round the lighthouse ensures a safe return.
The lighthouse is very impressive because it's up on top of the hill and in all its splendor of white and brown stripe and so forth. And it's green all around it except for the water, which is on 2 sides. And it's just very special, very quiet, very natural beauty here.
Dick White is chairman of the Montauk Historical Society's Lighthouse Museum Committee.
This is gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous. The bluffs are some 80 feet tall, and you look out on the ocean, and on clear days you can see all the way up to Point Judith, Rhode Island, and back past New London, Connecticut. And if you're really tall, you can see Portugal.
Montauk Point Lighthouse stands at the easternmost tip of New York's Long Island, where generations of immigrants caught their first sight of America. The tower and buildings are among the best preserved and most popular lighthouse structures in the country.
The museum gets over 100,000 visitors a year. And then we have a diorama that shows all of the lighthouses along the Atlantic Ocean on Long Island, as well as Long Island Sound, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New Jersey. The kids love it. It's interactive. You press a button and the light on the lighthouse lights up, and pictures light up on the wall and give you a description of what's going on. And kids love that. So it's informative but fun at the same time. On a clear night, the 3.5 order bivalve lens would project a beam 19 nautical miles out to sea. When it was first put in, it was lit with kerosene, and it wasn't until 1938 that the Coast Guard electrified it and put a 1,000-watt bulb in it. And today, in the museum, we can only put a 40-watt bulb in, otherwise we blind people, because it's right at eye level. It's a very utilitarian piece of glass and brass, but it's also very pretty.
Almost the entire length of Long Island's South Shore is protected from the ocean by a stretch of narrow barrier beaches. The longest is Fire Island. Transatlantic vessels heading for New York Harbor generally aimed for the Fire Island Lighthouse. Like so many barrier islands, Fire Island has been constantly shifting since the lighthouse was built nearly a century and a half ago. Dave Grease is a park ranger at the Fire Island National Seashore.
Fire Island Lighthouse was on the tip of the western portion of Fire Island in 1825 when they built it originally. And since then, because the longshore current travels basically from east to west along Fire Island, it's built on another 5 or 6 miles where it is at the present time. So the lighthouse is not on the tip of Fire Island anymore. Fire Island is quite different. It's unique from the other typical ocean resorts because there are no vehicles within the communities or on Fire Island.
With no cars, residents have developed other ways of getting around. The little red wagons that dot streets and docks are an icon of Fire Island. They are used by homeowners and summer renters as a way to get food and other belongings to their homes. Once vessels passed the Fire Island Lighthouse, they began looking for the highlands of Navesink. The highlands rise 200 feet above the northern New Jersey shoreline. The twin lights of Navesink guided ships into and out of New York Harbor.
First lighthouse was built here in 1828. They were two separate lighthouses. They did not connect like the current structure does. The replacement for those particular lighthouses was the structure that is now here, the 1862 twin lights, which was a connected building.
Thomas Laverty is the principal historic preservation specialist at the Twin Lights Historical Site.
The twin lights were designed to make it very distinctive from the Sandy Hook Lighthouse so that mariners would not mistake the two. Navesink is a very unique lighthouse in its architectural style. We're not 100% sure why it was designed like this. One of the favorite stories that a lot of our school kids like to hear is if you look at the square tower and the octagonal tower, they seem to resemble chess pieces, the king and queen of a chess set, and that entire building looks like a castle. If you look back in the 13th century, you can find a lot of castles that have very similar architectural details.
A lot of lighthouse history occurred at Navesink Twin Lights. The nation's first Fresnel lenses were installed here in 1841. Later, they became the first lights to be fueled by kerosene. With the installation of a massive bivalve lens in the South Tower in 1898, Twin Lights became America's first electrically powered lighthouse.
The bivalve lens is very significant because it was perhaps one of the brightest lighthouse lights in the United States. The first order bivalve lens is in our collection and had been on exhibit for a while when it was damaged, and it is now under repair. And once the prisms are replicated and installed, we will put it back on display for the public. It is a very big light. It's 9.5 feet in diameter. It weighs 10 tons. It has about 24 different glass prisms in it, and it rotated once every 10 seconds, and since it was double-sided, a bivalve shape, it gave a flash every 5 seconds. If people come today to visit Twin Lights, they won't find an actual operating lighthouse. We do keep the North Tower beacon going as sort of a memento, if you will, to the age when it worked as a light station. But today the lighthouse is a historic site and museum operated by the state of New Jersey, and it's just a wonderful place to come on a beautiful afternoon or evening and sit and watch the ocean.
Just north of Navesink, Sandy Hook is the only survivor among the early colonial lighthouses. Built in 1764, the tower is the nation's oldest, still standing and operating navigational aid. Although located in New Jersey, Sandy Hook was known for many years as New York Lighthouse. It was financed by New York merchants, afraid of losing commerce to such better marked harbors as Boston. With over 4,000 miles of coastline, Chesapeake Bay is America's largest estuary. A century ago, no body of water in the country was better lighted. Fewer than a third of the lighthouses built on the Chesapeake remain today because of erosion, ice, and vastly improved technology. With several major ports, the Chesapeake is a maritime highway for ocean-going shipping. It also fosters a distinctive local waterman's culture.
We don't call them fishermen, we call them watermen. And I think that's mainly because we don't just fish here. We catch crabs, oysters, clams, all different types of seafood as well as fish.
Pat Votek is author of a book on Chesapeake Bay lighthouses. She has sailed just about everywhere on the bay.
This is not the type of job that, you know, if the weather is bad, you just stay in. Many of these guys go out in bad weather, they get caught in bad weather, and they're the type of people who they judge themselves by how many bad storms they've weathered. Many of the lighthouses were built to help guide watermen in the various rivers as well as to guide the steamboat captains. We don't have the rocks here that you have in Maine, so people didn't always perceive the type of problems that they would run into. However, we do have quite a few shoals, and this is what became treacherous in the Chesapeake Bay. You get a bad squall, which was fairly common, and you could lose ships on these shoals very, very quickly and very easily. Chesapeake Bay has more squat conical lighthouses than they have tall ones because we didn't have as long an area for a light to be cast over. Old Point Comfort is a good example of the conical lighthouse which had a detached dwelling. That light was built to guide vessels into Hampton Roads, which is one of the two major harbors on the Chesapeake Bay. Jones Point is a perfect example of a very inexpensive dwelling with a lantern room on top that were common up rivers where you didn't have long distances that you had to throw a light. And these were generally cheaper ways of building a lighthouse.
The style of lighthouse most associated with the Chesapeake Bay is the screw pile lighthouse. These structures were placed on the open waters. They were literally screwed into the bottom of the muddy shoals. Of the more than 40 screw pile lighthouses built on the Chesapeake, only one remains at its original location. Thomas Point Lighthouse is the best known and most beloved lighthouse on the Chesapeake Bay.
It's about 25 from the rocks. About 15 feet from the rocks. He's up.
Even among the screw pile lights, Thomas Point was distinctive.
Peter Lesher is the curator of the Chesapeake Bay Maritime Museum.
If you look at Thomas Point, there's no mistaking you're at Thomas Point if you find it in the middle of a fog or something to that effect. The Thomas Point light is really remarkable in a couple of ways. One, in that it's in a rather exposed location just south of Annapolis. It's very subject to ice. Because of large piles of rock that protect it north and south, it has managed to survive the ice flows for more than a century. It remains the only screw pile lighthouse on the Chesapeake Bay in its original location. And it was the last lighthouse on the Chesapeake Bay that was still occupied by Coast Guardsmen. It wasn't automated until sometime in the 1980s.
Coast Guard Station Apples, Coast Guard Station Apples is Thomas Point Light.
Thomas Point Light Station Apples.
Running with the lights out. Call it to these Baltimore and come check it out. Over.
Roger that, Thomas Point Light.
While Thomas Point is not accessible to most people, there are a number of places around the bay to see examples of the Screw Pile Lighthouse. The Hooper Strait Lighthouse is part of the Chesapeake Bay Maritime Museum at St. Michael's, Maryland. Museum curator, Peter Lesher.
Our lighthouse was the second structure built on that site. The first one was built in 1867, and after only 10 years of service, it suffered the fate of a number of other screw pile lighthouses. It got knocked off of its foundations by ice and sank rather quickly, apparently. The two lightkeepers were able to escape only with the clothes they were wearing. 2 years later, the replacement for it was built, which is the lighthouse that we have preserved today. It actually had a long, useful life. It was built in 1879 and served with lighthouse keepers in it until 1954, and at that time it was automated. The lighthouse remained automated until 1966, at which time it was slated for demolition by the Coast Guard and replacement by a pole light. And the museum really purchased the lighthouse from the demolition contractors and then paid to have it cut off at the top of its pilings and moved up here to the museum.
The oldest surviving example of the Chesapeake's classic screw pile lighthouses sits at Baltimore's popular Inner Harbor. Red, round, and all metal, 7-foot Knoll Lighthouse served for more than 130 years. In 1988, the 220-ton lighthouse was cut from its pilings and carried on a barge to its current home at Pier 5. The 1870s saw the development of the final style of lighthouse that came to be identified with the Chesapeake Bay. The caisson lighthouse, like the screw pile, was placed offshore, where it would do the most good on the dangerous shoals of the bay. Chesapeake Bay author and photographer Pat Votek.
The caisson light was the style that replaced many of the screw piles after they were destroyed by ice. These are mainly very sturdy, very strong. They were hauled to the site and then they were lowered down into the water and into the mud. At Baltimore Light, the caisson had to be lowered some 86 feet below the level of the water, and this is because that area was mud and they had to get down to solid ground. The 12 that were built on the Chesapeake Bay are all still standing. Most people don't realize that at its glory in 1900 there were over 60 lighthouses marking channels and rivers and shoals. You really, literally couldn't get out of sight of a lighthouse. We're very lucky that a few of them were saved. Lighthouses have a romantic quality to them. And I think it's not just because they're often beautiful architectures. The points of land that they were on were often very remote, wild, beautiful places. But then on top of that, you've got that struggle between man and nature that you knew went on there at the lighthouse. And it was the lighthouse that helped man to survive the struggle with nature.
One place where the struggle between man and nature is evident is at the southern end of the Chesapeake Bay. A lighthouse at Virginia's Cape Henry has marked the entrance to the bay for more than 200 years. Cape Henry didn't get its first lighthouse until after the Revolutionary War. It was the first to be built by the new federal government. President Washington supervised its construction. Nearly a century later, large cracks began to split the stone tower. Because of fears that the lighthouse might collapse, a new cast iron tower was built about 100 yards to the southwest. Standing 156 feet tall, the new Cape Henry Lighthouse began service to the Chesapeake Bay shipping lanes on December 15, 1881. It was fitted with a first-order Fresnel lens. The old sandstone lighthouse never did collapse and is now open to the public. Cape Henry is one of the only places where both the old and new towers remain standing. In the shadow of these aging aids to navigation is some of the most modern equipment in the world.
Calling the container ship Nubble from the Virginia pilots. Yes, sir, Captain. Proceed in. We will board you on arrival, 1800 CBJ buoy, Charlie Bravo Juliet. Pilot on arrival.
The four-story tower that overlooks the Chesapeake Bay shipping lanes is operated by the Maryland and Virginia Pilots Association. One of these pilots must guide every foreign registered ship into and out of any Chesapeake Bay port.
We have a control tower at Lynnhaven that's very much like an air traffic control tower. That is the eyes and ears of the pilot station. It's manned 24 hours a day. We track every vessel that comes and goes at Cape Henry.
Rick Amory is president of the Virginia Pilots Association.
We meet the ships on their arrival, we board the ships, and assist the master in guiding the ship safely into the berth that they are going to. The pilot carries with him local knowledge, and when they board, they take the chart in their mind because they've had to memorize it. The 5-year apprenticeship is spent learning every shoal, every buoy, every characteristic of this port. At Cape Henry, we have 6 miles to transit before we get to the pilot boarding area. We greet them as they enter from the open ocean, from ports all over the world.
Yeah, go ahead. I'll scoop on the belt and it's tunnel down.
Good weather, it's a piece of cake.
Okay, thank you.
It's a very smooth ride, bluebird day. You climb up a Jacob's ladder with very little fanfare. But unfortunately, we don't always have bluebird weather.
There we go. Yes,
We have tremendous wind at Cape Henry, tremendous sea conditions build up at Cape Henry. Cape Henry, I think, can probably be one of the roughest boarding areas in the country. Sometimes it's very tricky, and so we have to go on board ships with less than a perfect lee provided by the ship. There's a certain danger that's built in that pilots have a way of putting out of their minds. And if you didn't have that mechanism that would allow you to put that risk out of your mind, I don't think you could do this job. Lighthouses have been around for a long, long time. Cape Henry Lighthouse was here when I started my apprenticeship, and I have learned to depend on it, as I think every mariner that comes in and out of Cape Henry depends on Cape Henry Lighthouse. We have all kinds of radio equipment. We have all kinds of satellite navigation equipment. We have Lorans, we have depth sounders, we have compasses. We have all these wonderful things to tell us where we are. But when your eye sees the light of Cape Henry Lighthouse at night, it sees its red sector or it sees its white sector, you know where you are. The lighthouse is there. It doesn't go out, it doesn't move, it's always in the same place, and you can always depend on it.
This is PBS.
Legendary Lighthouses, supported in part by a grant from Lighthouse Depot, your source for lighthouse collectibles, artwork, and decor, so that you may keep the legend alive. Lighthouse Depot store and catalog of Wells, Maine. And by the annual financial support of PBS viewers like you.
Where the sea meets the land, danger resides. As sentinels of the shores, lighthouses are legendary.
Lighthouses are sexy. Lighthouses have always been essential to fishermen, and I think they'll always be essential.
When I first went there, first thing they told us, don't go near where the ghost is.
The spirit of Lighthouse to me is nature blending land and sea together.
Lighthouses are symbols of one of our highest purposes, the preservation of human lives on storm-tossed seas. For more than 200 years, Maine's lighthouses have stood as beacons of warning and of welcome. West Quoddy Head is as far down east as you can go in Maine, and for that matter, in the United States. As close to Dublin as it is to Los Angeles, it is here that the new day dawns on the USA. For many European immigrants to America, the glow of a coastal lighthouse was the first sign of the new land. It marked the end of the hazardous North Atlantic voyage. Radiant gems of lead crystal and brass, the handcrafted Fresnel lenses were made in 7 sizes. The largest lenses, more than 12 feet tall, were used on seacoast lighthouses. The West Quoddy Head Lighthouse, with its third-order lens, marks a channel entrance. The U.S. Lighthouse Service was established in 1789. In the early 1800s, the Lighthouse Board mandated new standards of excellence. Since 1939, the U.S. Coast Guard has carried on the tradition. Bosun's mate, David Candy.
In the modern world, the lighthouse is antiquated at best, because we have all the different buoyage systems in and everything, but I don't know, there's always just been something about them, whether it's just maybe the sweep, at nighttime, sort of that lonely beam that constantly goes across, like the faces of houses. And the Coast Guard, home is where you got to get back to. When you read more about the history and you hear about these feats of resilience and bravery that these lightkeepers had, there's a lot of people that lost their lives doing that.
Picturesque Lubec once thrived on its fishing industry. Today, its principal claim to fame is that it is the easternmost town in the United States. The Lubec Channel Light was classified as a stag light. Lighthouse families didn't officially live aboard, but spouses may have been stranded there from time to time. Elson and Connie Small were newly wed when he was assigned to the Lubec Channel Light. The Smalls kept lighthouses along the Maine coast for 28 years.
When I went on the lighthouses, I was only 21 years old, and I had lived in a home that I was more or less pampered, and I never had to be out and have any rough kind of a life. I always was afraid of boats. I was always afraid of heights. And here I am in a boat going out to the Channel Light. Finally, we got to the lighthouse. And I looked up that 30 feet of black iron, and I said to Wilson, I said, I can't do it, because it's just a ladder to climb up. He says, oh, yes, you can. He says, you take a hold of the rung, and I'll be right behind you, and you look up and never look down. And that's been my motto all my life. Look up and don't look down.
The waters around Mount Desert Island in Acadia National Park are navigated by recreational and commercial mariners alike. Bass Harbor Head Lighthouse marks the entrance to Southwest Harbor. Best seen from the water, it is also a popular destination for land-bound visitors. Maine is best known for the harbor lights dotted along its 3,500 miles of serpentine shoreline. This magnificent lens was designed by its namesake, the French optics genius Augustin Fresnel. Manufactured for the lighthouse service by the firm Henri Lepaute, it's powered by a 1,000-watt electric lamp. This third-order lens has served the seafarers of Blue Hill Bay since 1858. The grounds around the lighthouse are open to the public. Often, the personal vision and commitment of private citizens are required to save crumbling lighthouses. The Bear Island Light is not currently open to the public, but it's being preserved for the enjoyment of future generations. Dr. Martin Morad is the light's present-day keeper.
Well, I saw the island in 1972. We came here and I saw a young lighthouse keeper and his bride living in here, and I thought it was one of the most romantic places I ever saw. It was very primitive. There was no water, there was no electricity, and they seemed to live in this wonderful sort of a magical island. When I saw this lighthouse, it was just beautiful. There was nothing else more beautiful. And essentially my idea was to restore the island in a spirit of doing something for the nation that was more than just giving a painting to a museum or something like that. Give something that would have some meaning and would have my soul in it. This country has been extremely good to me, and I felt that I needed to give back something. And I want to turn the tower into a library or something that would represent the fauna and the flowers of the state of Maine, and hope the future generation will enjoy the same thing we did. The spirit of Lighthouse to me is this purity of nature blending with land and sea together. It is difficult to explain what it means to see an American eagle flying over the lighthouse. I can't explain the feeling, the emotion that you have. My blood pressure dropped by 10 points every time I walk in on this island. I've lived in all the major American cities. And every time I went by a cemetery, I said, do I want to be buried here? The answer was no. And the first time I walked into Maine and saw this island, I feel I have no problem being buried here. That's perhaps the summary of what it really means to live on this island and being part of this blessed, beautiful place.
Stonington, at the tip of Deer Island, is a classic Maine fishing village. Mainers are proud of their maritime tradition. Lighthouses are part of the landscape both literally and symbolically. Locals recognize that lighthouses are more than tourist attractions. They are vital links to home for the loved ones who go to sea to earn a living. The mail boat from Stonington carries passengers out to Isle Ho, a beautiful and remote part of Acadia National Park. The lighthouse at Robinson Point on Isle Ho is the site of the Keeper's Inn bed and breakfast. Jeff and Judy Burke are the innkeepers at this unique B&B.
Lighthouses are sexy, for one thing. There's something about them that just stir our most fundamental feelings and emotions.
I think, you know, much of our national heritage has been paved over. You know, it's gone. But lighthouses still exist on the fringe of all that, you know, out in the most remote little corners of the coast, up and down both sides of the country. And they were built in some of the most incredible places that we have. And the architecture that went into them, the engineering, everything was the best that the country could offer.
I have a real connection because my father was a lighthouse keeper. And in my bedroom in Truro, where I used to sleep every night, you could see the light from my bedroom window. And so it was always a very comforting feeling. And so it is kind of in my blood, I think.
The type of experience that people have here usually takes them by surprise.
You all have a nice day.
We don't have telephones or electricity here, and no entertainment per se. We don't have anything here. And I think that that's the amenity we have, is nothing.
We keep the rooms, you know, not overflowing with stuff in them. You know, we try to gear people to the outside so they'll experience the nature and the natural part of the scenery. I think food is an important ingredient here. So that's sort of my forte, is making sure the food is good. We pack people's lunches and they walk out the door saying, "Thanks, Mom," you know, and things like that.
You know, our guests are part of our life. The richness that we get here is from having the time and opportunity to interact with other people. These people that walk through the door who we've never seen before sit right here in these chairs. And little by little by little, we don't pry, we don't require people to reveal themselves to us, but if we make ourselves available, we find they do as well. Strange things happen to people while they're here. They make career-altering decisions. They propose to their sweethearts. They decide that they're going to move, that they're going to leave the city, or they're going to embark on some new adventure that they never thought they would do.
I feel like a lot of people walk in the kitchen before they leave and they just say, "You've probably heard this a million times, but I really want to tell you what a wonderful experience this was for us." And they are very, very grateful. And that really makes me very happy, no matter how many times I hear it.
Fort Point Light Station is located in a state historical park. The original lighthouse was built in 1836, but the fort dates back to the French and Indian War. Over the years, numerous battles of a different sort have begun here. The light is fully automated. An electronic fog detector senses the air density and switches on the foghorn. The life of the lightkeeper is but a memory here. A unique note from the past does ring on at Fort Point. It is one of the few remaining fog signal towers in the country. Though the clockworks are gone, visitors can still thrill to the sound of an authentic 19th century fog bell, struck by a primitive mechanism. Vinyl Haven in Penobscot Bay is one of Maine's vital island communities. The third largest of Maine's coastal islands, it can be reached by car ferry from Rockland. The town was founded in 1789, and for generations, it's been a favored recreational destination for locals and visitors alike. Susan Lassard is the manager of the town of Vinyl Haven.
Vinyl Haven is an island located 15 miles off the coast of Rockland, Maine. It is a working community of approximately 1,300 year-round residents. It's a community of extremely independent and strong-minded individuals. People survive on Vinyl Haven by doing a number of things. The majority of them fish for a living, but there are also caretakers and carpenters and artists and sculptors.
Bobby Warren and his daughter Christine Conway fish for lobsters out of Vinyl Haven. as just one example of the strength of family ties in close-knit island communities. Bobby not only fishes with his daughter, his boat is named for her children.
I love being out in the outdoors and being independent. I like lobstering. It's a nice way to make a living. There seems like there's more lobsters now, but lobsters are, like any fish, I think work in a cycle. And that means that you have a few good years and a few bad years. On a typical day, we haul between 250 and 300 traps. What we get out of them all depends on the time of the year. I think we got a female here, though, that's maybe got eggs on it. Oh, look. Covered with eggs. There's a good many thousand little babies there. We can't keep lobster eggs, or lobsters that's got eggs on them. So that one there is a breeder. That's our future. The modern electronics are very good. That is, if everything works right, but it's nothing but an electronic instrument, and it could go on the blink. The lighthouses have always been essential to fishermen, and I think they'll always be essential to fishermen. On a foggy day, it's pretty reassuring to hear them blowing, and if something should break down, which could possibly happen, all you have to do is shut your engine off and listen for the lighthouse. And at night, you see a white beacon, you know that you're safe, you know that you're in the right area. Yep. My sole stern crew is my daughter. To be truthful with you, I was kind of reluctant at first, thinking that maybe she couldn't do the work, but she does a lot better than I expected. She does just as good as any man I've had with me.
At first, when I started going lobstering with my father, I didn't think I was an outdoors person because I used to be a dental assistant and I enjoyed that. But now, after being outdoors and working in it, I like it.
She seems to know what I'm thinking. A lot of times, I don't even have to tell her. She kind of senses it or something, picks it up. I suppose it's closeness of working together.
My husband and I work at it together, so I can go out to haul with my father. He helps me cook and clean and take care of the children. When I'm coming back in from hauling all day, I go home and cook dinner and get them ready for bed and then do it all over again the next day.
I don't really know anything else. I don't know how you could beat it, really. As long as there's lobsters to catch, I'd just soon be doing it.
Just offshore from Vinyl Haven, Tiny Green's Island is the real Never Never Land. A place for whimsical sailing boats, where boys do fly, and adults can realize their fanciful artistic vision. Buckley Smith and his wife Becky came to Maine from California in search of a place to create Buck's unique art and to raise their two sons in a wholesome environment.
Boats have always been my main interest. As a kid, I used to draw boats. I did a lot of model boats. And then whenever I got a chance, I would sail in friends' boats.
We always had boats when I was younger, but I hadn't planned on really sailing around the world until I met Buck. We came to this island on our sailboat years ago. Let's see, it must have been 1978. We came to meet a man who Buck had been working with on Vinyl Haven.
I've always liked traditional type boats and old sailing stories and the whole tradition of sailing. And I think that's kind of what brought us to the East Coast too, is just the tradition behind the sailing and the fishing days and the boat building and all that sort of thing that went on around here.
Living on the boat teaches you a lot about living, especially on an island the way we do here, because you learn to really respect resources. If the sun's shining, we know that the solar panels are bringing electricity into the house, and then if it starts raining, that's nice too, because it's filling up the cistern.
There's incredible art in the construction and design of a boat, and I've been fascinated by that world where it takes actually a good artist to be a good draftsman of boats. You have to have a sense of balance and line. How do you make a living being an artist? It's hard these days. So I find for myself I have to do a lot of different things. And I've always been good with my hands. I've been a builder of all sorts of things, from houses to boats. And it's a wonderful feeling to step out in my backyard here right now and sail for 20 days and be in the Azores, and maybe 8-10 more days you can be in Europe on your own little sailboat that you just went out and got off on your own little dock on, and there you are. And it's a beautiful feeling.
Phil Dyer is a die-hard practitioner of traditional Maine marine design. He builds functional but elegant wooden boats.
I was determined when I built boats on three things: sound, solid, and secure. Because I held a man's life in my hands when I built him a boat. Now we'll put the old iron to her again. Pea pods, they're stable. You can't roll a pea pod over. Lighthouse keepers use pea pods, especially down on Saddleback. Saddleback is a ledge out in the middle of the ocean. And the only way you could get on that when it was rough, they had a boom that come out. And they would pick the stuff up out of the pea pod and swing it in. The fiberglass, I really haven't got anything against it. They all want it. Well, I'm just going to shuffle along with my old wooden pea pod. Because now, any boat, or any rowboat, or punt, or anything built out of wood is like an antique. It's a trade that is going to die. Damn it, I was born too late in life. I should have been around about 200 years ago when they built them big 4 and 5 and 6 masters. That's when I should have been born, is then.
Sue Lazard's job as town manager of Vinalhaven provides her living accommodations that no other municipality can begin to match.
One of the interesting facets of the job was that part of the responsibilities of this position is to live at Brown's Head Light and do the maintenance and upkeep of the light. Living in a lighthouse is an education, and you start to develop a real sense of the history of where you are. There have been keepers of the light here at Brown's Head since 1857, and although the light is automated, I'm the current resident of that light, and I'm part of the light's history too. I believe that people are fascinated by lighthouses for a lot of reasons, but the one word that crops up every time I talk to someone who's out here at the light or whatever is romance. People see lighthouses as a very romantic symbol of our nation's history and of shipping and of maritime related matters. The truth is that it is magical and it is wonderful, but it is also a lot of work. Since I've been here, I've really come to appreciate the job that the lights perform for people who work on the sea. As it gets later into the season and they're out in darkness and coming in darkness afterwards, as well as providing a navigational aid, it provides moral support. It's the key to telling them where they are, and more importantly, that somebody is there just in case.
The Shore Village Museum in Rockland is Maine's and perhaps the nation's most complete lighthouse museum. Lighthouse memorabilia, nautical treasures, and the most magnificent collection of lighthouse lenses under one roof line the building from floor to ceiling. Founder, curator, and frequent tour guide Ken Black was a career Coast Guardsman who began his love affair with lighthouses while still on active duty.
Kids love our museum. everything that can work does work. Would you like to play with this? Yes. I know everybody does, so you really come on in here, we'll show you some more. Over here on the wall is a chart, and this is all of the lighthouses in Maine. Maine has the most lighthouses of any coastal state. What state do you think has the most lighthouses?
California? Washington?
Michigan.
Michigan.
Michigan has 119. Every lighthouse has to be different from every other lighthouse. Now, before electricity, it was very difficult to make lighthouses different. And this is the way they did it. They put bullseyes in the lenses and then rotated them, made them go round. Now every time that bullseye passes between you and the light, flash. It really doesn't flash, it just looks like a flash. The light is lit all the time. The reason you had the lighthouse keeper was there was no way to determine when the fog came in. So that's what the lighthouse keeper did. And this is a machine, it's simple as it says here, it's a fog detector. And the way this thing works, I'll turn it on, simply is, this is a strobe light. This receiver will read what's in that light at exactly 15 feet. And at a given reading, turns on the fog signal. This is the equipment that really spelled the death knell of the lighthouse keeper.
Lighthouse heroine Abby Burgess is a legend in lighthouse history. In the winter of 1856, 17-year-old Abby single-handedly kept the two lights of storm-battered Matinicus Rock burning. From the time she arrived in Matinicus at age 14, Abby worked alongside her father, Samuel Burgess, and became quite proficient at the workings of the lighthouse. Even more importantly, she understood how crucial the keeper's job was. With Abby left in charge, her father went to the mainland for much-needed supplies. The weather prevented him from returning to the island for a month. While Keeper Burgess was away, the island was awash with record seas. Abby didn't know if her father had been lost in the raging storm. She faced starvation, cared for her bedridden mother and two siblings. And through it all, she carried on in the best tradition of the lighthouse service. Connie Small knows very well the sacrifices made by the wives and children of lighthouse keepers.
There was many cases that we had to do our part, and more than our part, the women did. But I say that the true heroes of the lighthouse were the mothers of children. They raised families on those.
Picturesque Rockland is undergoing the sometimes uneasy change from commercial fishing to a tourist economy. As native Mainers would say, Peter Ralston is from away.
Have a good one.
Peter's heart and soul are very much in Maine. He co-founded the Island Institute to give something back to his beloved adopted home.
Rockland really used to be full of this sort of stuff. There used to be boats like this and larger, stacked in here 2-3 deep. It's all gone now with the collapse of the fisheries, the ground fisheries offshore. All the big boats are pretty much gone. The Rockland Breakwater Light sits, as you can sort of see in this fog, the end of a mile-long breakwater, which really defines the harbor here in Rockland.
Owl's Head Lighthouse marks the western entrance to Rockland Harbor.
You think over the years that literally tens of thousands of ships
have found their way into this harbor in a thick of fog, dead of night, storm, thanks to that light, thanks to the fog signal.
The Island Institute was established in 1983 to help sustain Maine's vanishing island communities through research, education, and community services. Lighthouse preservation became a part of the Institute's work when the Keeper's House at Heron Neck was scheduled for demolition.
Well, this is it, Heron Neck on a foggy day. We'll row ashore. Lucky we've got high water for a change. We had never really done any hands-on work with lighthouses until here on Heron Neck, the lighthouse burned in April of 1989. The Coast Guard determined very quickly that it was irreparably damaged and decided to tear it down. Network television crew from Portland came out here and they filmed it. It was a wonderful spring day. There were daffodils coming up, little lambs bleating and carrying on. It was very compelling, and it actually made the Today Show. That first national exposure elicited something like 1,500 cards, calls, letters, faxes. That outpouring of sentiment basically ground the scheduled demolition of the light to a halt. In the fall of 1993, the United States Congress approved the transfer of the Heron Neck property to the Island Institute. In the course of successfully gaining that first congressional transfer, it struck me that the standard transfer process could be improved. I thought about one piece of legislation that would authorize the transfer of a lot of lights at once. That was really the germ of the idea that led to the Maine Lights program. I went into all this lighthouse business not as a lighthouse aficionado. My interest in lights has always been, I suppose, far more practical. I'm on the water 12 months a year, and there is something really reassuring, elementally necessary, important and significant about lights. People who live hundreds and hundreds of miles from the ocean, who will never have to rely on a light or a fog signal as an aid to navigation, they somehow get what lights are all about. I think that lights really speak to vigilance, they speak to caring, they speak to being there, helping other human beings. That's the symbolic significance of them.
On this afternoon, Peter will pay a visit to his childhood friend, artist Jamie Wyeth.
Well, I was raised in Chadds Ford, Pennsylvania, and grew up with the Wyeths. Andy Wyeth and his wife Betsy are almost his second parents. Their son Jamie and I are very close. When I first got here, I really knew this is where I was meant to be. It was one of those things. I've traveled a lot, I've seen a good bit of the world. There was something fundamentally different, special here. There are values, and there are ethics, and there's a way of life. There's a culture that is still very largely intact here. People are in touch with how their great-grandparents lived and made their living from the sea. And of course, it's very beautiful.
An accomplished photographer, Peter was encouraged by Andrew Wyeth.
Andy's original challenge to me was to go deep. And here I found a place I really wanted to go deep, as a photographer, as somebody who really wanted to live here. The Wyeths, both Andy and his son Jamie, their entire lives have revolved around perhaps a 10-mile radius from their studios. Tight little worlds in which they have done, of course, masterwork after masterwork.
Tennant's Harbor Light on Southern Island is the home of Jamie Wyeth. The Wyeth family have been strong supporters of Island Institute programs.
One of their
programs the Institute was doing was trying to preserve or save lighthouses, which are on a lot of these islands. And so I thought it was a terrific program, I having lived in a lighthouse. And so I thought, well, let's do a print of this painting, Iris at Sea. And then I did this limited edition of 300, and the money that's raised in selling these things supports this program. Islands I've lived on all my life, and I find, at least in the last few years, it tends to give me more focus in my work. Living on an island is one thing, but yes, living in a lighthouse, it is living in a cliche. I mean, there's no question about that. But I happen to have a lighthouse in this island, and it is wonderful looking, and I've used it in my paintings. I don't care if it is a cliche. Islands per se don't interest me. Trees per se don't interest me. Or somebody says there's an interesting person that you should paint. People don't really interest me. What interests me are islands that I know and that I've grown up on, and trees that I've known, and people that I've known.
Monhegan Island has provided inspiration for such luminaries of American art as George Bellows, Rockwell Kent, Edward Hopper, and the Wyeths.
To me, these people who choose to live in these islands, it imbues them with something. Number one, why did they choose to live in an island? And number two, they can't help but be affected by living in a place, particularly Monhegan, which is quite far offshore. I mean, it's 20 miles out at sea. The mailboat comes, 3 times a week in the winter. And I think it gives them a perspective on life. I mean, this little boy, Cat, he entertains himself in the tide pools of the island, with the shells, climbing the rocks. He knows every part of Manana. That fascinates me. I mean, they don't have television. He's hardly seen television. He's a prodigious reader. I mean, I've had him pose for him. And, people say, well, get a child that age to pose. You ought to use the television. Well, that's the worst medium to use, because I find when, if you look at somebody watching television sometime, it's the worst expression. It's just kind of a non-thinking expression. It's difficult working in a state like Maine because it is very cliche-ridden. I mean, every place you look is, lobster buoys hanging, beautiful scenery. If you get beneath that, there's some real edge to Maine, and particularly on islands. I mean, it isn't a sweet life. You're seeing it in the summer. It's very pretty and lovely. Summer is only 2 months out on these islands, I mean, the rest of the time it's windy, blows like hell, and cold. And, that's the side that fascinates me with Maine. And if you get through all the symbolic cliche stuff, and, it's a remarkable place.
The Marshall Point Lighthouse marks the entrance to the harbor at Port Clyde. The Coast Guard maintains the aid to navigation, and the keeper's house is the site of a fine little local history museum. Bob Ensor is a member of the Port Clyde Historical Society.
There's been a lighthouse at Marshall Point since 1832. The Coast Guard, not wanting to be burdened with maintaining the buildings, declared them surplus. The town, not having the wherewithal to support the lighthouse any more than the Coast Guard had, asked the local historical society would they assume the responsibility for preserving the buildings. The local historical society, probably not being of quite sound mind, declared that yes, they would accept that responsibility. One of the ladies who was a member of the committee, her name was Jane Scarpino, came up with a very short little story about our dog Nellie. I just did some sketches to go with her little story. The book came out in the spring of '93, and much to our surprise, the book has been up near the top of the bestseller list in the state of Maine, and pretty much countrywide ever since. It has contributed considerably to the support of the museum. Obviously, you can't write a story about a dog unless you have a dog, or at least you shouldn't, at any rate. Nellie was a real dog that my grandchildren rescued when she was just a puppy. All of the people and places in the story are real places and real people. And it has become as much of a story that reminds people of their happy visit to the Port Clyde area as it does a story about Nellie.
Pemaquid Point is a favorite spot for photographers, amateur geologists, tide pool explorers, and just about anyone who enjoys the seashore. Before the development of a road system in Maine's interior, commercial transport was by means of coastal freight ships. The ships sailed close to the shore and frequently fell victim to the treacherous coast. It looks peaceful here, but the beautiful and dangerous Pemaquid rocks still exact their grim toll. A number of unwary tourists have ventured too close to the water's edge, been seized by a rogue wave, and swept to their deaths in the churning, icy cold waters of the point. Many star-crossed mariners went ashore on Pemaquid's treacherous rocks. These faded images are grim reminders of the toll exacted where rock meets rolling sea. Even the stoutest of vessels, guided by the steadiest of hands, was no match for the power of wind and wave. Seguin Island lies just over 2 miles off the shore of Popham Beach, Maine. Ann Webster Wallace founded the Friends of Seguin and is the director of the Maine Lights program. Philip Germain is the president of Friends of Seguin.
I'm standing on the tower at the light at Seguin Island, Maine. Seguin is off the mouth of the Kennebec River. It's 180 feet above sea level, and it's the second oldest light on the coast of Maine. This light can be seen a distance of 20 miles on a clear night.
This has always been the lighthouse in my life. When I was a child, I'd go to sleep by the sound of the foghorn. It was the beacon off on the horizon. It was just a magical place.
In 1985, the Coast Guard decommissioned the light, which meant that it was basically abandoned by man. Everything was automated, and the Coast Guard felt that there was no longer need for them to keep the property.
It just seemed such a shame to me to let this piece of history just disappear. So I formed an organization called Friends of Seguin Island. We have caretakers here in the summer, a small museum. It's open to the public, and it's a wonderful, magical place to visit.
My family has lived at Popham Beach, Maine, which is just across the water here, for 106 years. We're the oldest summer residents of Popham Beach, Maine. And I've looked out on this light all my life. And I certainly have felt an attachment to it, and just seeing it and knowing it's there, it's a part of my heritage. As you see how remote these places are, and consider that in the old days before helicopters and high-speed boats, when people used to sail here or row here, and they had to be able to pick the weather window in order to be able to get out to these islands. Sometimes people would be left on them for days, weeks on end with no other human contact.
Wind-swept Seguin evokes many memories.
Well, I got a chance to go back to Seguin here a few weeks ago, and the last time I was there was 51 years ago. And
Tom Schofield spent his early childhood years on Seguin Island.
My dad went in the lighthouse service in 1936, and around Thanksgiving was my first trip out to Seguin, and I was 18 months old. We left Popham Beach and headed for Seguin in a 33-foot Coast Guard boat, and it was rough. We rolled it completely over in the cove. We had about a minute before we'd hit the rocks, and luckily the engine started and we made it into the cove. That was my first experience and my baptism, I guess, into life on a lighthouse. I think it was a good childhood. It was like being Tom Sawyer. I had the roam of 68 acres, surrounded by water and 2.5 miles from shore. I turned about 8 years old, and Dad and I went out to put a net out, and we had a little 6-month-old puppy dog with us, and It was quite a groundswell running that day. We were in a 16-foot boat. Some of these freak waves came in. They were about 15 feet high, breaking, and they took the stern right over the bow of the boat. They catapulted my dad out. I got thrown out somehow or other, and he thought I was a goner. A little dog didn't make it, so he was trapped under the boat. But, that was my second baptism, I guess. So it was a hard place to live.
Elson Small became head keeper of the Seguin Light in the summer of 1926. The Smalls lived there for 4 years.
Seguin was a bigger island, and there was 3 keepers there. And it was altogether different. It was a social place. You could have the keepers socialized. And, of course, you could have your vegetable garden there. The assistants used to have nice vegetable gardening.
Visitors to Maine come and see the lobstermen fishing, pulling the lobster traps. They eat crab and fish. They walk on the beaches. But the lighthouses make them also realize that for man to coexist in nature, he sometimes needs a beacon with which to be able to steer his ship and be able to get safely home.
People that love lighthouses have an expression: keep the lights burning.
The city of Portland, Maine has a busy harbor that accommodates a wide variety of mariners with different navigational needs. Radar, Loran, and now GPS have all made the mariner's path a little clearer and a little safer. For the flash of a familiar light or the gong of a fog bell are still comforting signs that all's well when the weather gets thick. The approaches to Portland are marked by modern buoys and several lighthouses. The Portland Breakwater, or Bug Light, is an elegant Greek Revival structure fabricated of cast iron. The Spring Point Ledge Lighthouse is a spark plug light, similar to the one in Lebec Channel. It was once just offshore, but a breakwater now joins it to the land. Desolate Ram Island Ledge Light was built from granite blocks, quarried on Vinyl Haven Island. Keepers occupied this lonely beacon until 1959. Maine's first lighthouse, Portland Head, was completed by order of George Washington in 1791. It stands 101 feet above the water's surface and casts its beam 24 nautical miles out to sea. An inspiration to writers and artists, it's one of the most visited, photographed, and painted lighthouses in the world. Edward Hopper painted this view of the East Tower and Keeper's House at Cape Elizabeth's Two Lights in 1929. It is one of the most beautifully crafted lighthouses on the Maine coast. Two Lights was so named because of the twin light towers that were erected there. The Lighthouse Service experimented with a number of coastal twin lighthouses, but abandoned the idea in the 1920s. The detail on the lighthouse tower is a fine example of the Italianate style that was popular at the time of construction in 1874.
Kathy and I originally got interested in lighthouses because she wanted to visit every lighthouse in Maine.
Tim Harrison and Kathy Finnegan of Wells, Maine, are lighthouse entrepreneurs and publishers of Lighthouse Digest.
Well, we could do this in an afternoon or two. Not, of course, realizing that there were 68 lighthouses along the coast of Maine. And most of those lighthouses were remote and difficult places to get to. And the average person just can't get to them in an afternoon. You have to rent a boat or a helicopter to get out to them. And in the process of doing that, we found there were a lot of other people that were doing the same thing, visiting the lighthouses, planning their vacations around them. But the thing is, once they got to these lighthouses, they didn't know a whole lot about it. And they had trouble finding it. So we decided to write a book. And the book came out and was called Lighthouses of Maine and New Hampshire.
The light on the Cape Neddick Nubble is a rare gem set on a rocky ring of granite at York, Maine.
Come on right in, just join us. We're just doing a little talk on the Nubble here today, and
I do a lot of
Bill Thompson is an enthusiastic friend and supporter of the Nubble Light.
keepers and the automation and all that type of thing. When I was a young boy, I began to make ships and bottles. And I used to sell these for 25 cents a piece to the gift shops. I would be sitting out here on the porch of the little shop making these ships and bottles. People were coming in from all over the country, in fact, all over the world. And they would just sit here and absorb this lighthouse and absorb its beauty. Lighthouses are beacons of strength. The educational institutions use lighthouses, banks use lighthouses, trust, hope, security. And I think when people come here and see this lighthouse, it's something they really can't touch, but it's a way of life they'd like to be a part of. It seems to be a non-stressful type of life that they feel, gee, if I was in that lighthouse, I would have no stress. Life would be so beautiful, so calm, so tranquil.
For Connie Small, life on a lighthouse was not always stress-free.
It's life and death sometimes. And you, whether you know how to do it or not, you've got to do the best you can do doing it. Because that light had to be lit, because here was all these people. And their lives depended on that light.
Mike Sullivan is the Director of Parks and Recreation for the town of York, Maine.
The lighthouse is one of the most photographed lighthouses on the eastern seaboard. Well, I think the acquisition of the lighthouse is a wonderful thing for the community. My staff takes a lot of pride in the way we maintain the building and the property. From a historic preservation standpoint, I think it has tremendous potential. Every year, just prior to Christmas, we do what we call the lighting of the Nubble. The entire lighthouse is outlined in white rope lighting. There are candles in all of the windows. There's a Christmas tree in the main window. It's quite a community event. In addition to that, we also do what we call the Christmas in July, which is exactly the same event, duplicated in July for all of those tourists and summer residents who don't get a chance to see it just prior to Christmas.
One thing about lighthouses, they've generated a lot of ghost stories, apparitions, whatever you want to call them. The Nubble Light is wrapped in steel. That steel heats up during the day. At night, that steel will contract when it gets cold. As it contracts, you'll hear creaking. You'll hear boom sound. Now, if you're out there all by yourself, you might think this is a little eerie. These lighthouses are all circular towers. Now, the wind gets in a little crevice and it rips right up through the interior of the house. It gets up into the lens room and you can hear this wind whistling around. Very, very creaky. Mother Nature just creating all these beautiful, beautiful sounds and effects so that you and I, with an imagination, could say, boy, this lighthouse is sure haunted.
My father never believed in ghosts, and so he brought us up not to believe in it. But when I first went there, first thing they told us, don't go near where the ghost is. He's in this room, and or he's down in the basement. And every time I went there, I had this feeling, you know, that probably he'd pop out at me anytime. But I never heard him or ever saw him.
For nearly 3 decades, Maine lighthouses were home to Connie Small. Her dream to write was realized with the publication of her book, The Lighthouse Keeper's Wife.
Even though I had lived and been associated with lighthouses, I never once thought I'd ever live on one. I wanted to be a portrait painter or a writer. I was better educated on the lighthouse in my life than I would have ever been in schools because I lived it. You read about it.
Legendary Lighthouses, supported in part by a grant from Lighthouse Depot, your source for lighthouse collectibles, artwork, and decor, so that you may keep the legend alive. Lighthouse Depot store and catalog of Wells, Maine. And by the annual financial support of PBS viewers like you.
This is PBS.